Ok, ok. Tom, un poco hablar acerca de esta investigación que tú has hecho al detalle de Francis Leonard. Se ha hablado mucho acerca de su relación con la Armada estadounidense y de que pueda tener información importante.
So I made a podcast called Fat Leonard, which came out last year in the US and across the world. And it was based on 25 hours of interviews with Leonard Francis. He was in home detention in San Diego, and we smuggled a microphone to him.
Bien, ¿cuál es su situación? Él escapa de los Estados Unidos, entiendo estuvo detenido, acusado por sobornos y corrupción. ¿Por qué es importante Francis Leonard para los Estados Unidos y cuál fue su relación con la Armada norteamericana?
So the United States wants to get Leonard back to America because he is supposed to face sentencing. He was supposed to face sentencing on September the 22nd for his role in bribing Navy officers, US Navy officers, in return for lucrative Navy contracts. And so he ran away and ended up in Venezuela and was caught by your authorities. And he's wanted back in America to face sentencing for bribing the US Navy.
Se habla de que él fue proveedor inclusive de muchísimos negocios con la Armada de los Estados Unidos. También hay una relación con Craig Faller. ¿Cuál es justamente esa relación en términos de negociaciones, de comercio con la Armada de los Estados Unidos? ¿Por qué es tan importante para el gobierno de Biden?
Well, I think that in the US, and as we reported in the podcast, the very senior members of the Navy were not adequately punished for their role in the Fat Leonard scandal. So a lot of people were indicted, over 30 people, but not very many Navy admirals were indicted. In fact, only one Navy admiral was punished. And I think that's because the Navy was trying to protect its senior ranks in this bribery scandal.
Francis Leonard está en Venezuela, está detenido. ¿Crees tú que hay un interés o podría haber un interés del gobierno de Estados Unidos de negociar su extradición de Francis Leonard a los Estados Unidos?
I'm not an expert on relations between Venezuela and the US. However, I think the US would want to see Leonard Francis back in its judicial system, because this is a huge embarrassment for the American courts. The fact that this guy was able to run away just weeks before his sentencing is a huge black eye. And in America, the reporting from the Associated Press and others is talking about him coming back and him facing potentially a longer sentence than he would have got if he hadn't gone on the run. So I think the US is keen to have him back in the country.
¿O qué información clasificada de interés para Estados Unidos tiene Francis Leonard?
So the Leonard Francis story was a total national security failure for the US Navy. Leonard would pay for admirals and senior Navy officers to have sexual encounters with prostitutes. And he told me in the podcast that he would take videos and photographs of those encounters. And in return, he would get very lucrative contracts for his business, serving Navy ships. And he made a lot of money. So that sexual compromat is very, very dangerous for the US Navy, that the US Navy officers were acting in this way, and that kind of material is out there, potentially out there, that Leonard still has control of, is very, very bad. He also had knowledge of ship schedules and submarine schedules. That stuff, I think, is dated now, but that also caused a huge national security issue. When he was arrested, the NCIS were very worried about the national security problem, not so much the corruption, but the national security issue.
A ver, te pregunto lo siguiente, ¿de cuánto dinero producto de corrupción estamos hablando?
Well, Leonard had a business making $100 million annual revenue. It was a huge business. He lived in a $130 million mansion in Singapore. He had, Lamborghinis and many Rolls Royces, 20 luxury cars. I mean, this story is about the huge defense spending that America had after September the 11th, the $800 billion it spends annually, and the corruption of that, frankly. I mean, Leonard was able to live a lifestyle of a billionaire based only on contracting for the US Navy. So I believe that the money he took out was much larger than 35 million. That's just the amount he was indicted for. And he clearly still has control of a lot of money. I mean, he was able to go on the run, which involves paying off a lot of people. And we still don't know exactly how he was able to get out of the US into Mexico, Cuba, Venezuela, but that involves paying off people. So he's still obviously a wealthy man.
Julian Assange fue extraditado o está ese proceso hacia los Estados Unidos. ¿No tienes miedo o no tienes miedo? Tú has hecho varias investigaciones sobre este caso que maneja información delicada y de seguridad nacional para los Estados Unidos. ¿No tienes miedo que puedan tomar represalias en tu contra por seguirle el paso a esta investigación tan delicada?
No, I'm not afraid at all. I mean, I think journalists, if all you're doing is telling the truth, then I think that's a great protection. And so, you know, at Project Brazen, we've written this story based on all the research we did on it. And I think it's very important that we shine a light on such matters because, you know, the US Navy is the largest Navy in the world, and it should be held to a very, very high standard. And by investigating this and by asking questions about why certain very senior US Navy admirals were not punished, we are shining a light on it and hopefully helping to improve the workings of the US Navy.
¿Por qué tú crees, ya que tú tuviste la oportunidad de entrevistar a Francis Leonard, qué motivación tenía para ir a Rusia? ¿Qué es lo que quizás no cuadra allí?
Well, he told me that when he was living in Singapore in his $130 million mansion, it was just down the road from the Russian embassy, and that the Russian defense attaché would come to his door with a bottle of vodka and knock on the door, and clearly Leonard was being approached as a potential asset for Russia. And the Chinese, he told me, did the same thing. Now, when Leonard was being investigated by the NCIS, by the American naval investigators, he actually moved all of his files onto a Chinese server. And my reporting shows that China has gotten hold of some of the material, including some of the sexual compromat. And so that's part of the national security failure here. At the time, he told me he didn't want to talk to the Russians because he was making so much money from the US Navy. So clearly now facing jail in America, up to 20 years in jail, he's rekindled some of those Russian connections. That's what I would assume. I don't have knowledge of that, but the fact that he was trying to get to Russia shows me that, you know, he was trying to find some kind of safe haven, a place where he could be safe, and maybe he still had some of those Russian contacts.
Tomando en cuenta lo que estás diciendo y la información privilegiada que tiene Francis Leonard, ¿crees que Estados Unidos va a negociar con Venezuela para extraditarlo? O en todo caso, quizás Francis Leonard tiene más interés en negociar con Venezuela.
I have no idea. I've got to say, that's what I'm trying to find out. And so if you know anything about that, I'd love to know. I think it's fascinating, the situation now, because obviously he's in Venezuela and the US want him back, and he was arrested on an Interpol red notice from the US. Clearly they want him back. Whether that's going to happen, I don't know. And I'd be really interested to see what happens in the next few weeks.
Una investigación bien interesante a propósito de la captura de este ciudadano de Malasia que tenía negociaciones y una acusación de corrupción en los Estados Unidos en una relación con información estratégica de la Armada norteamericana. Agradecido entonces por la oportunidad para Venezuela News, medio digital de Venezuela, y que está muy interesado en esta información que, como dicen, está en pleno desarrollo. Muchas gracias, Tom, desde acá desde Venezuela, Caracas.
Gracias.
Gracias, Tom.